How childhood silence creates adult overthinkers. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't just exist in a room, it settles into a child's mind. Not the peaceful silence of a quiet evening. Not the comfortable silence between people who feel safe with each other. This is a heavier silence. The kind where a child slowly learns that speaking up might lead to criticism, dismissal, or tension in the air. A silence where emotions feel inconvenient, where questions feel unwelcome, and where the safest choice becomes saying nothing at all. So the child adapts. Instead of expressing what they feel, they begin storing it. Instead of asking questions, they start answering them in their own mind. Instead of speaking their thoughts out loud, they let those thoughts circle quietly inside. Years later, that same child often grows into an adult whose mind never stops moving. An adult who replays conversations long after they end, who rereads messages to check if the tone sounded wrong, who lies awake at night revisiting moments that everyone else forgot hours ago. They become overthinkers. But overthinking rarely begins in adulthood. More often, it begins in childhood, in the quiet spaces where thoughts had nowhere else to go. When children first come into the world, they are naturally expressive. They cry when they're uncomfortable, laugh loudly when something delights them, and ask questions about everything they see. Their curiosity and emotions move freely. But childhood is also the time when the environment slowly teaches them what is acceptable to express and what isn't. Maybe a child grows up hearing phrases that sound small but carry heavy meaning. Stop being dramatic. You're too sensitive. Don't argue with adults. Sometimes it isn't even harsh words. Sometimes it's something quieter. A child tries to explain how they feel, and the adult simply doesn't listen. The conversation is brushed aside. The emotion is ignored. The moment passes without acknowledgement. At first, the child keeps trying, but eventually they begin noticing a pattern. Talking doesn't change anything, so they stop talking. What looks like quiet behavior from the outside can actually be the beginning of something deeper inside the mind. When emotions can't move outward, they turn inward instead. Instead of sharing worries with someone else, the child starts processing everything alone. Every confusing moment becomes something to think about privately. Every mistake becomes something to analyze internally. Slowly, the brain builds a habit. Thinking replaces speaking. This often gets mistaken for maturity. Quiet children are usually praised for being easy to manage. Adults might describe them as calm, respectful, or well-behaved. But what people rarely see is the invisible activity inside that quiet mind. The mind is constantly observing, constantly analyzing, constantly preparing for what might happen next. Because when expression doesn't feel safe, the brain finds another way to process emotions. It thinks through them again and again. Over time, this habit can evolve into a powerful inner voice. Sometimes that voice is supportive, but often it becomes something more critical. Children who grow up around frequent criticism or emotional distance often internalize those voices. Eventually, the criticism no longer needs to come from parents or teachers. The mind starts producing it automatically. Why did you say that? That sounded stupid. They probably think you're annoying. These thoughts may appear suddenly, but they usually come from years of subtle conditioning. The brain learned early that mistakes could lead to judgment, so it began trying to catch those mistakes before anyone else could. Overthinking becomes a form of protection. If you analyze every situation deeply enough, maybe you can prevent embarrassment. Maybe you can avoid conflict. Maybe you can protect yourself from rejection. But protection comes with a cost. The mind rarely gets to rest. Another pattern that often develops during childhood silence is heightened awareness. Children who grow up in emotionally unpredictable environments tend to become experts at reading subtle signals. They notice small shifts in tone. They observe changes in facial expressions. They sense when the mood in a room suddenly tightens. Their brains become skilled at monitoring emotional landscapes. This skill can be incredibly sharp, but it also creates a habit of constant scanning. Even when the environment becomes safer later in life, the brain may continue operating the same way. After a conversation ends, the mind replays it. What did that look mean? Did my comment sound rude? Were they annoyed when they said goodbye? While others move on quickly, the overthinker stays behind mentally, examining every detail. It's not because they want to be stuck there. It's because their brain learned long ago that understanding subtle signals might help them stay safe. Another effect of childhood silence is emotional confusion. When feelings are rarely acknowledged or discussed openly, children don't always learn how to identify them clearly. Instead of recognizing sadness or anger directly, The mind begins trying to analyze those feelings. Why do I feel like this? Did I overreact? Maybe it's my fault. Thinking becomes a substitute for feeling, but emotions rarely resolve through analysis alone. The more someone tries to think their way through emotions, the more complicated those emotions can become. The mind keeps circling the same questions, hoping clarity will appear through repetition. For many adult overthinkers, social situations become especially exhausting. Conversations feel like puzzles that must be solved perfectly. Words are carefully chosen, sentences are mentally rehearsed, and small mistakes feel larger than they actually are. Afterward, the mind keeps replaying the moment. Maybe I talked too much. Maybe I sounded awkward. Maybe they misunderstood what I meant. This mental replay can happen hours later, sometimes even days later. What many people don't realize is that this pattern often began as a way of staying emotionally safe in childhood. When saying the wrong thing once led to embarrassment, punishment, or rejection, the brain learned to prevent that pain in the future. It began rehearsing, running simulations, imagining different outcomes before speaking. And although the original environment may be gone, the mental habit remains. One of the quiet lessons childhood can teach is that silence sometimes feels safer than honesty. If expressing anger once led to punishment, the child learns to hide anger. If sadness was ignored or dismissed, the child learns to hide sadness. But hidden emotions don't disappear. They accumulate. They settle into the mind and slowly transform into something else. Thoughts. Thoughts that return again and again, searching for resolution. Overthinking is often what happens when emotions never had the chance to be spoken aloud. The mind keeps revisiting situations because something inside still wants understanding. Something inside still wants acknowledgement. Many adult overthinkers describe living almost entirely inside their own heads. Even when everything around them is quiet, their thoughts continue moving. They revisit past conversations. They imagine future possibilities. They analyze choices they haven't even made yet. From the outside, they may appear calm and composed, but internally the mind rarely turns off. It's trying to solve emotional questions that began long ago, questions that were never fully answered, questions that were never fully expressed. The encouraging part of this story is that the patterns built during childhood are not permanent. The brain remains capable of learning new habits even years later. One of the most powerful shifts happens when people begin expressing emotions in ways they couldn't earlier in life. Talking about feelings can gradually reduce the pressure that builds inside the mind. Writing can help too. Journaling allows thoughts to leave the endless loop inside the brain and settle somewhere visible. Once thoughts exist on paper, they often feel less overwhelming. Another important change is learning to experience emotions without immediately analyzing them. Instead of asking endless questions about why a feeling exists, it can sometimes be enough to simply recognize it. I feel frustrated. I feel disappointed. I feel anxious. Naming emotions helps the mind stop chasing explanations. Interestingly, healing doesn't mean eliminating silence completely. It means discovering a different kind of silence. The silence of childhood often felt tense and uncertain, like something important was being held back. But adulthood can create a calmer silence, a space where thoughts don't need to race and emotions don't need to hide. In that kind of quiet, the mind slowly learns that it doesn't have to work so hard anymore. Overthinking begins to soften, not instantly and not perfectly, but gradually. Because many overthinkers were never simply people who thought too much. They were people who felt deeply in environments where those feelings had no safe place to go. Their minds became storage rooms for unspoken emotions and unanswered questions. Overthinking was never just a flaw. Sometimes it was a survival strategy, a mind doing the best it could with the silence it was given. And once that silence begins to break, through expression, understanding, and self-awareness, the mind often discovers something it didn't know was possible. Peace. Not because the brain stopped thinking, but because it finally learned that it no longer had to carry everything alone.